There are moments in life when words pierce deeper than actions, not because they were cruel, but because they told a truth we weren't ready to hear. That's what happened when I came across these three quotes by Carl Jung. They didn't soothe me, they shook me, but what once felt like confrontation eventually became liberation. Quote 1. What you resist persists. Sometimes the quotes that change your life don't come wrapped in comfort. They come like sandpaper against your skin, scraping at everything you thought you understood. Carl Jung's words, "What you resist persists," landed like that for me. I remember reading it in a quiet moment and feeling a wave of irritation. It felt accusatory, like it was blaming me for my pain. I wanted to shout back, "I'm trying to survive this. I'm not resisting. I'm coping." But the more I sat with it, the more I realized that resistance wasn't about effort. It was about refusal. The refusal to feel, the refusal to see, the refusal to let something uncomfortable be. And that I was doing all the time. Avoidance is one of the most natural human instincts. When something hurts, when it confuses us or shames us, we push it down. We bury it beneath productivity, relationships, spiritual bypassing. We tell ourselves we've moved on, but our bodies know otherwise. Our dreams know otherwise. And the world, curiously, keeps showing us otherwise. Jung's quote began to make more sense when I saw how often I was haunted by the very emotions I tried hardest to avoid. The grief I suppressed after a loss began surfacing as irritability. The anxiety I denied turned into control issues. The shame I thought I had healed showed up in every room where I felt unseen. It was like life was echoing back what I refused to acknowledge. Jung wasn't moralizing. He was observing a psychological law. The unconscious doesn't obey the rules of the conscious mind. It doesn't forget because we want it to. In fact, the more we suppress, the more energy it takes to keep things buried, and the more pressure we create within ourselves. That pressure builds until it spills into our behaviors, our relationships, our health. This is why people say things like, "I don't know why I snapped," or "that came out of nowhere." It didn't come from nowhere. It came from what you've been resisting, what you've been pushing to the edge of your awareness. The problem is, the more we fight a part of ourselves, the more power it gains. Like trying to hold a beach ball underwater, it's only a matter of time before it shoots back up. Often when it does, it's messy. At some point, I had to ask myself, what am I so afraid will happen if I just feel this? That question was terrifying, because for most of us, our resistance is tied to very old wounds. Childhood moments when crying wasn't safe, when anger was punished, when sadness made us feel abandoned. So we learned to armor ourselves, to avoid, to perform, to please. Resistance became our survival strategy. But as Jung might say, what helped us survive then is often what keeps us stuck now. That unprocessed grief, it leaks into every new ending. That ignored rage, it surfaces in our passive-aggressive comments or sudden explosions. That suppressed vulnerability, it keeps us from truly being seen. What we resist persists, not to torment us, but to return us to the place where we were first split from ourselves. One of the first moments I truly tested Jung's teaching was during a panic attack. Everything in me wanted to resist, to fix it, breathe through it, distract myself, make it stop. But instead I tried something new. I welcomed it. I sat on the floor, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Okay, what do you need to say?" And what came up wasn't more fear. It was sadness, old sadness, forgotten sadness. Not the monster I feared, but a young part of me that had never been allowed to cry. The panic began to dissolve. Not because I defeated it, but because I stopped fighting it. Jung's words finally made sense. Not as a warning, but as an invitation to meet what I'd been running from, and to find out it wasn't so monstrous after all. There's a quiet kind of freedom that comes when we stop resisting our emotions. We start to feel space inside again. We stop being hijacked by the same reactions. We stop projecting our pain onto other people. Jung's quote isn't just about suffering, it's about healing. Because anything we're willing to sit with, we can integrate, and anything we can integrate becomes a part of our wholeness. What you resist persists isn't a curse. It's a compass. It points you toward the places within that are still asking for your attention. the parts that still believe they have to scream to be heard. And the moment you listen, the scream softens, the pressure releases, and you begin, slowly, to come home to yourself. Comment, shadow work, if you're ready to stop running and start listening. Is a kind of betrayal that stings deeply, not the kind done to us by others, but the kind we do to ourselves when we pretend not to recognize our own reflection in someone else. Carl Jung's second quote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life," was one of those truths I wanted to reject. At first glance, it sounds poetic, but it felt more like an accusation. Was he really saying that the people who triggered me, hurt me, or confused me were just versions of myself? I didn't want to accept that. But the more I looked at my life, the more I realized, yes, in ways both subtle and stark, the world was holding up a mirror. And what I saw in that mirror wasn't always easy to love. There were patterns I couldn't ignore. The friend who always interrupted me reminded me of how often I silenced my own thoughts before they could fully form. The partner who made me feel invisible echoed the parts of myself I had long ago stopped acknowledging. The boss who criticized everything I did mirrored my inner critic. The voice that had been with me since childhood, whispering that I wasn't enough. Jung's insight isn't about blaming ourselves for others' behavior. It's about recognizing the psychic resonance that pulls us towards certain dynamics. We are drawn, again and again, to the people and situations that mirror our unresolved parts. Sometimes it's our pain, sometimes it's our potential, but either way, it's always personal, even when it feels external. What Jung invites us to see is this: if you keep meeting the same kind of person in different clothing, or if you keep facing the same emotional challenge no matter where you go, it's not coincidence, it's curriculum. Life is giving you another chance to reclaim a piece of yourself, not because you failed, but because you're ready. The disguises change, the faces, the places, the situations, but the emotional imprint stays the same until it's integrated. This is not a punishment, it's a path to wholeness. I used to get angry at the repetition, now I see it as grace. Life keeps bringing you back to yourself because some part of you is still missing from the story, and it wants to return home. This concept terrified me when I first began to witness it, because it meant I had to stop casting myself as the passive character in the script of my life. I had to admit that I was unconsciously co-authoring many of the experiences I claimed were happening to me. I had to acknowledge that the people I labeled as difficult or toxic were sometimes triggering parts of me that I hadn't yet faced. That's what makes this quote so painful and so liberating. When you realize you are meeting yourself in disguise, the anger begins to melt into understanding. The judgment softens into compassion. You begin to ask different questions. Not why are they like this, but why is this showing up for me now? And the answers, when they come, are rarely simple, but they are always sacred. There was a season in my life where every romantic relationship felt like a mirror I didn't want to look into. I kept attracting people who were emotionally unavailable. Each time, I told myself it was just bad luck, but one night, after another painful ending, I sat down and wrote out every single relationship I had been in, and the pattern was undeniable. I had never allowed myself to be fully vulnerable. I had never actually believed I was worthy of being chosen. Jung's words echoed in my mind. We meet ourselves time and again, and in that moment I saw clearly that these people weren't here to hurt me. They were here to reveal me, to show me what still needed healing, to guide me, however painfully, back to the parts of myself I had left behind. When you begin to see your life through this lens, everything changes. The annoying coworker becomes a symbol of your repressed assertiveness. The friend who always needs saving reveals your unresolved need to feel valuable through rescuing. The partner who won't open up points to the parts of yourself still locked away. None of this makes other people's behavior okay, but it gives you the power to grow through it instead of just suffer under it. Jung wasn't asking us to live in self-blame. He was calling us to radical self-recognition, because the more of yourself you can see, the less the world has to scream it at you. Comment below if you've ever met a version of yourself wearing someone else's face. You're not alone. The path home is through the reflection. There are some truths that don't just sting, they shatter. Carl Jung's third quote, Whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event, was one of those. I remember reading it and feeling almost insulted. Did he mean that all the chaos in my life was somehow my fault? That the heartbreaks, the job losses, the betrayals were just reflections of something in me? At first, I couldn't accept that. It felt cruel. But Jung wasn't speaking from a place of blame. He was describing a psychic reality, one that quietly governs much of our lives. What we disown internally finds a way to express itself externally. Life becomes the stage upon which our rejected parts act out their stories, whether we realize it or not. I used to think rejection meant pushing something away. But Jung showed me that rejection is also forgetting. It's the decision, often unconscious, to not allow certain parts of ourselves to exist. Maybe we were told as children not to cry, not to be angry, not to speak up, not to need too much. So we adapted, we buried those instincts, we told ourselves they were dangerous or shameful. But the psyche doesn't discard what we bury. It repackages it, and eventually what we reject begins to manifest in the world around us. A string of failed relationships, a career that feels like self-betrayal, a body that aches in places tied to emotional wounds. These aren't just unfortunate events. They are symbols, echoes of what hasn't yet been acknowledged within. I once had a recurring experience that broke me open. Every few years, like clockwork, a major life disruption would occur. Something that left me feeling powerless. A breakup, a financial loss, a health scare. Each time I'd tell myself it was just bad luck. But after reading Jung's quote, I began to look deeper. And what I found was unsettling. Every disruption followed a period where I had been suppressing some truth. Staying in a relationship that no longer aligned. Staying silent at work when my values were compromised. Ignoring my emotional needs to keep the peace. The more I rejected my voice, my needs, my intuition, the louder life had to speak on my behalf, and sometimes it screamed. Those events weren't punishment, they were messages. Messages I had ignored until the world had to deliver them for me. Jung's idea may seem mystical at first, but it's grounded in deep psychological observation. If you've rejected your anger, you might find yourself constantly surrounded by people who are explosive or disrespectful. If you've rejected your power, you may unconsciously attract controlling figures. If you've denied your grief, you might keep experiencing loss in ways that force you to feel it. The outer world reflects the inner world not because you're manifesting punishment, but because your psyche is always seeking integration. It wants to be whole, and it knows that the only way to heal what's fragmented is to bring it to light. So it projects it, not to shame you, but to show you, to say this too is you. And until you claim it, it will keep showing up, because it needs to. One of the most profound realizations I've had is that most of the chaos I tried to control in the outer world was actually a mirror of the chaos I hadn't faced within. And the moment I began to look inward, truly look, I didn't just feel pain, I felt relief, because now I had a thread, something to follow, a path that made sense. I realized that life wasn't attacking me, it was initiating me. It was pushing me toward the parts of myself I had tried to leave behind. And once I stopped rejecting them, once I invited them in, the external storms began to settle. Not because life stopped being hard, but because I stopped being at war with myself. If this resonates with you, comment below what recurring event life has been trying to wake you up through. This quote may be the hardest to digest, but it's also the most freeing. Because once you accept that the world is reflecting your unconscious material, you stop feeling like a victim of random misfortune. You begin to see meaning in the mess. You begin to work with life, not against it. Jung believed that the goal of the psyche is wholeness, and wholeness requires inclusion of the messy, the angry, the afraid, the unlovable. When you reject these parts, life will echo them back to you until you remember, until you reclaim, until you integrate. That is the deepest purpose of every painful event, not to destroy you, but to deliver you back to yourself. There's something quietly heartbreaking about realizing how often life has been trying to help us see what we've been unwilling to face. For most of us, our suffering isn't random, it's patterned, it repeats, not because the world is cruel, but because we're still rejecting something essential inside ourselves. Jung's quote, "Whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event," makes more sense the longer you sit with it. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. You begin to see your life not as a series of unfortunate circumstances, but as a carefully constructed message. One that says, "This is the part of you you've abandoned. This is the wound asking to come home." I've seen people spend their entire lives trying to control the outer world, thinking that if they just organize their relationships, their schedule, their finances, or their health just right, the inner chaos will go quiet. But Jung turns that equation upside down. He says, go inward. That's where the outer storms begin. That's where the disowned parts of you are calling out through experiences, hoping you'll finally stop, listen, and let them back in. When I started to do this work, really do it, I didn't just feel sad, I felt reverence. Because for the first time, I realized that even my suffering had been sacred. It had been leading me, teaching me, helping me integrate what I thought I had to bury to survive. It's easy to think of healing as a straight line, as something you achieve and then move on from. But Jung didn't see it that way. He saw the psyche as a spiraling journey. We circle back to the same wounds, the same fears, the same old emotions, but each time we come with a little more awareness, a little more self-compassion. And that's what makes the difference. Because integration doesn't mean the pain disappears. It means the pain finally belongs. The rage no longer erupts, it speaks. The sadness no longer paralyzes, it softens. The fear no longer controls, it informs. This is the work of a lifetime. And it doesn't happen all at once. But it begins the moment you stop asking the world to change and start asking, what in me is waiting to be reclaimed? Somewhere along the way, I stopped fearing life's difficult events, not because I became immune to pain, but because I began to see pain differently. I started asking, what is this here to show me? When a relationship ended, I looked at what I had compromised in myself. When I felt unseen, I asked how I had been ignoring my own needs. When life stripped something away, I asked what identity I had attached to it and why. Jung didn't promise comfort, he promised depth. And depth is what saves us when everything else falls apart. Because once you understand that the world is shaped by the self, you also understand this: every transformation begins within. Every event is an echo, and when you change the echo chamber of your psyche, the sound of your life changes too. This journey isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering yourself. You were never broken, you were fragmented. Pulled apart by conditioning, by survival, by fear. But now, through awareness, you have the chance to come back together, to retrieve the pieces you left behind in childhood, in heartbreak and shame. Jung's teachings are not quick solutions. They are lifelong initiations. Initiations into your own depth, your own power, your own wholeness. And the truth is, no one can do this work for you. But once you begin, life will meet you, over and over again, not as an enemy, but as an ally, echoing back the parts of you ready to return home. So if you've heard something in these words, if a pattern has revealed itself, if a truth has stirred, this is your invitation. Comment the day you're beginning this journey of self-discovery, whether it's through shadow integration, dream journaling, or simply sitting with your emotions without running. And then come back in a few weeks and tell us what's shifted in you, what changed, what softened, what returned, because your growth matters, not just to you, but to those you may inspire by sharing it. Somewhere, someone is waiting to see what healing looks like. Let them see it in you.